Hey Henry, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Guy. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing well. So today we've got Simpsons, we've got a good range, and there's an interesting story behind your brand and how you guys got going because you have an estate in France. So I think that the best way to start today's tasting is if you could fill some background on how you got involved in wine and particularly English wine.
Okay, well, I'll talk quickly about Simpsons, and Charles and Ruth and their involvement, and then I might give you a little bit of background about myself. But Charles was involved in the pharmaceutical industry. Ruth was involved in humanitarian organisations, and like a lot of us, about just over 20 years ago, they got the wine bug and decided that they would change their careers and get involved in making wine and selling and marketing it to the world. You know, they wanted to make wines that they enjoyed themselves, that had real character. So initially they looked at Australia and New Zealand because they enjoyed the wines from that part of the world. Had a look around, but couldn't find the right opportunity. Didn't fit exactly what they were looking for. So they came back to London and then decided the next step that they would move to the Languedoc region in the south of France and immerse themselves in the wine culture there with the view of looking at potential opportunities, not only in the Languedoc, but in France and parts of Europe. So this was just over 20 years ago. They moved to the Languedoc, and when they, having moved there, they looked around and they saw that it was a very consistent region for producing good quality, full-flavoured grapes. It's just that most of the grapes were going to large cooperatives, commercial cooperatives, to produce large commercial blends, some very good quality, some not so good quality, quite a lot in between. And having said that, though, there has always been, a significant number of family producers that have been producing distinctive wines with good character and successfully selling and marketing those to the world. So they thought that the Languedoc was undervalued and there was an opportunity there to start their wine adventure. So having decided that, they looked around and they found an estate called Domaine Saint Rose, which had a very good vineyard, a winery that was quite run down because it hadn't been used for many years because the grapes were all going to the cooperative, the local cooperative, and a very rundown house. So they thought this was perfect. They purchased it and set about tricking up the vineyard a little bit. It didn't need much work, but obviously the winery they brought up to the modern standards of the time, but retained the traditional concrete fermenters and renovated the house and began their wine adventure living in the south of France. So that was just over 20 years ago, and in that they've made some really appealing and distinctive wines, which they've successfully marketed to the UK, the US, and Northern Europe. They didn't bother with France because it's very competitive for French wines, so they very astutely went for the export markets from day one, and they still spent quite considerable time down there, and it's been going very successfully, as I said, for just over 20 years. Interestingly, they celebrated their 20th harvest last year, and in an area that's usually very consistent, we get, how the quality, the ripeness, and the quantity of grapes you get generally most years. It was the first year in 20 years that they suffered from frost. There were widespread frosts in France and most wine regions, but normally not in the Languedoc. But this year, in 2021, they had severe frost, so they could only pick about 30% of what they normally pick. So the joys of agriculture, Guy, you can never relax. There's always something that will provide a bit of a challenge, even in one of the most consistent wine regions in the world. So for 20 years, Domaine Saint Rose has been very successful, and about 10 years ago, Charles and Ruth decided that they were young enough, and some might say silly enough, to embark on another wine adventure. And they were thinking, what would we like to do next? And you know, like a lot of us, they tried English sparkling wine and really enjoyed it. They could see the potential. You know, here were some world-class wines being produced in a fairly small industry, in a marginal, climate such as England. And they decided that was the next adventure they wanted to embark on. And having decided that, as you know, England is a cool climate. It's on the edges of where you can successfully ripen grapes, particularly for still wines, but also to a certain extent for sparkling wines. But it has some really favourable conditions. But the thing is that where you plant your vineyard is key. You've got to find the right site. And they realised that very early on. It's a bit different from the Languedoc, where you can literally put a vine anywhere and it will thrive and grow ripe grapes. So having decided that they wanted an English sparkling wine project to make fine English sparkling wine, the site was very important. They'd started doing their research, and their research drew them to here in East Kent, one of the sunniest and warmest parts of the UK. And that's where they started looking initially for a suitable site for the vineyards. The other great thing about East Kent is that it is surrounded by the sea on the three sides. So where we are at the moment in Barham, the sea is only 4 or 5 miles away in 3 directions. So it provides some moderating effect. What they're also looking for, as typical, was south-facing slopes, because as you know, the angling the vines towards the sun makes quite a difference, huge difference, in terms of ripening grapes in a marginal climate, a cool climate, and preferably with free draining soils, so preferably chalk soils, because the vines don't like sitting in wet soil for great periods of time. So the other great thing about this part of East Kent, with the North Downs, the Kent Downs, an area of outstanding natural beauty, is there's quite a lot of chalk and plenty of south-facing slopes to choose from. So this is where they started looking initially. And the great thing about the chalk here, as you know, it's the same seam of chalk as you find in Champagne and parts of Burgundy that goes under the English Channel. So here in East Kent, just to the west, east of Canterbury, some very good conditions for establishing a sparkling wine estate. So having decided that, they started looking around the area, and Charles came across an advertisement in Decanter Wine Magazine at the time, we're talking about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, for 2 parcels of land near the village of Barham, where we are, lovely, beautiful Kentish village, that were deemed suitable for viticulture or a vineyard. So Charles thinks that was one of the first times that land has been specifically advertised as being suitable for a vineyard in the UK. Generally, you know, as you know, in the past, people were planting vineyards in England either have some spare land and they decide to throw some vines in and see how they go, or the more professional approach, they've sought out suitable sites, but often they've had to negotiate with a farmer, not mentioning the word vineyard, and purchase probably more land than they need to. Well, these 2 parcels of land were one of 30 acres, which is now a Roman Road vineyard, another one, the 60 acres, the other side of the village, now known as our Railway Hill vineyard, came with a report from Stephen Skelton, who's a great expert on English wines and English vineyards, very much involved in the early establishment of Chapel Down and various other vineyards. And he wrote a report saying how suitable the 2 parcels of land were. Charles and Ruth came down, had a meeting with them and looked at it and agreed and purchased the 2 blocks in late 2011, 2012. So having found these 2 sites, they put a lot of thought into what they're planting. And so because it's initially purely a sparkling wine project, they only considered planting the 3 classic varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier from day one. The other thing they looked at was planting on rootstock that was tolerant of chalk. Again, when the vines are on chalk, they get to that ripening point, ripening the grapes, they can be affected by the high level of calcium in the soil. And so they planted all three varieties on rootstock that are tolerant of chalk. So a lot of thought went into initial planting. So they planted, as I said, our Roman Road vineyard in 2014. And then the Railway Hill vineyard followed in 3 sections, 2016, 2017, and the final rural patch in 2020. So we're not quite up to full production yet, but to get an idea of our scale or what size we are, we would describe ourselves as a family-owned, medium-sized wine estate, producing, hopefully, at full production, we would produce around 250,000 bottles. So I suppose that compares with Chapel Down, somebody like Chapel Down or Night Timber. They talk about millions of bottles. We talk about 250,000 bottles. So just to give you an idea of the scale. So having, as I said, planted the vineyards with a view of being purely a sparkling wine project. The vines, I have to say, when I first came to the vines, they looked like they were really enjoying the sites. Particularly the Roman Road also has trees on all 4 sides, mature trees, which creates a bit of a heat trap, and that really helps with the ripening of the fruit. But the other thing they did, as an example of the amount of thought that's gone into it, they planted not only sparkling wine clones for each variety, they planted Burgundy clones as well to provide more depth and complexity to the sparkling wines. But what that has meant as we've gone along is that we've found that the sites are suitable also for ripening grapes to the point of being able to make good still wines, and we use those Burgundy clones to make the still wines. And I think one of the things in the English industry, going back at the wines I've tasted over I suppose about a 12 or 13-year period, probably a bit longer, is that sometimes estates make still wines in the warmer, richer years, but they're using those sparkling wine clones, which have a naturally high level of acidity. So I think the difference is now we're seeing in the industry is that the right sites are being picked for planting vineyards, and we're using Burgundy clones to make the still wines, which makes a huge difference in terms of getting that ripeness and that balanced flavour and managing that natural acidity that we get here in England. So that's a bit of a lead in, into where we are at the moment. My role, I've previously, before I came to Simpsons 3 years ago, I had a wine shop, independent wine shop in Whitstable nearby for nigh on 10 years. Prior to that, I've worked in the Australian wine industry for very similar sized wine estates in similar roles. I'm involved in sales and marketing, but also hands-on working in vineyards and in wineries. So yeah, it's a real joy to be back in a family-owned wine estate, working, with Charles and Ruth. Also, the English wine industry is very exciting, and to see some of the quality of the wines that are being produced. When I first opened my shop probably 12 years ago, very much, we had a wide range of wines, but I very much supported and liked selling the Kentish wines, and the improvement I've seen in that time has been extraordinary. And I think that certainly reflects in the amount of interest that's in English wine these days, and certainly world-class wines being made.
I think it's a good point you made there about the improvement and how it's continuing, and there's more and more momentum, more and more people getting interested, but they're getting interested in the right time. There's enough knowledge there. There's enough, like a lot of the experimentation of what works, what doesn't work has already been done. And so now that people are being introduced, they're coming in when it's still fresh, it's still exciting, and there's loads happening. So it's a good time for everybody.
It's very exciting, and I think one of the measurements is the amount of people that are asking for English wines when they're visiting restaurants or visiting, say, Kent, and they want to taste the local wines. But also worldwide, we're doing some exports, but we're finding, talking to people overseas that are in the wine trade, or wine writers. And, you know, the hot topic is, one of the hot topics in the world wine world is English wine. You know, it's a very exciting category. And, you know, sommeliers around the world are looking towards trying these wines and seeing what people are talking about. So, you know, we've got an opportunity here where it's, you know, we're part of an exciting industry. But, you know, at the same time, a lot of the, you know, as I said, the right sites and the right varieties being planted in the right sites is happening, and there's more planting going on, but it's still, you know, a lot of those vines are young and they're yet to hit their, you know, the full speed, you know, the proper high levels of quality as they mature. So that's exciting, and that's something to really look forward to as more mature vines come on the stream. It's very exciting, but it's also the level of professionalism, you know, that's come into it. The industry is far more professional. But having said that, there's a great diversity. You know, I've been involved in wine tastings of Kentish wines or English wines, and, you know, all of us have a slightly different approach and trying different things. And that's very exciting to see under one roof, the diversity of the different approaches, the different sizes of estates or businesses. So there is, there's a very good, great range of different wines to choose from England and Wales. I should not forget Wales.
I think that's a great way to lead into some of your wines. Where would you like to start?
I'd like to start, Guy, because, you know, where I come from, which is south of Kent in Australia, we'd say at this stage it's been a dry argument. So I think you're right. We should start trying your wine. And as I said, you know, initially the project, you know, the Simpsons wine estate is about sparkling wine, and we'll start with some sparkling wine. So what I'd like to try as we start talking about the sparkling wines is the Canterbury Rose Sparkling Rosé from 2019. And, you know, the beauty, this wine is all about capturing the lovely fresh berry fruit from the Pinot Noir that we grow here on our two vineyards. And I'd like to say that, you know, very much from day one, what Charles and Ruth wanted to do was to produce wines that reflect the sites where they're from, the vineyards we have here on the lovely chalk, you know, soils here, and this is one of those wines that really is it's all about capturing that lovely fruit that we get, the fruit flavours. So it's 100% Pinot Noir. It's made in the traditional method, or the great British classic method, and it's got a lovely pale colour initially, very attractive, and you can see the small bead. You know, for me, talking to new people at our tastings, you know, it's always a sign of quality, I think, to see that small bubble. You know it's going to be nice and hopefully caressing in the mouth. And then on the nose is this lovely, you know, strawberry, delicate strawberry, rose petal sort of aromas coming up, again inviting you in. And then,
very smooth on the nose. I noticed it's very well balanced. There's nothing too out of kink, because sometimes you can get a bit too punchy. This isn't. It's soft. It's smooth. It's very nice red fruit coming through, well balanced, and which is lovely.
Yes, I mean, you know, we'll talk about it across all the sparkling wines. You know, as a young estate, you know, one of the things we're doing is we're getting to know our vineyards. We're getting to know what the conditions mean here. But, you know, obviously, because of the climate in England, it does vary from year to year. So you do get great variation. So in terms of winemaking, you've got to be very nimble and flexible in terms of dealing with what's in front of you. And that's very much what Charles and Ruth and winemaker Lee really have done from the outset, is just to try and look at what is in front of them, and not being too, you know, straight in what they're doing. You know, be able to react, but always with quality in mind. And so, as an example, you know, our sparkling wines, we've, you know, we're settling down into a style. You know, the style we want for each of our sparkling wines. Each of the sparkling wines are different in themselves, and we're looking to see which is the style that best reflects our vineyards and what we want to express, from those vineyards. So, for instance, with the Canterbury Rose, this is, it started when it was first released, from the 2016 vintage. Was again lovely, fresh, probably a bit more crisper and minerally in style, and it's gone through to quite a riper, slightly sweeter style, and we've come back to this style for 2019 as we think this is the way forward. It best expresses that lovely fruit, but it's delicate and it's sophisticated. It's not screaming at you. It's just got some lovely, elegant, very sophisticated flavours to it. Really refreshing.
I think that's a very good. Sorry, I think that's a very good way to describe it. Is the elegance of the red fruit. It's not too sweet. It's not sickly sweet, sort of like candy floss. It's really lovely, natural sweetness from, or rather, giving the impression of red fruits. Very much like warm strawberries, warm raspberry. It's got a very nice mouthfeel. It's very delicate. Thankfully, it wasn't too ferocious on the tongue, because sometimes the bubbles can be a bit too invasive. Again, it's nice and balanced. It's very soft, very pleasing wine to drink as well. I love it when
it's a great way to start. A great way to start a tasting. It's really refreshing, and it's been very popular. And again, it's hopefully you'll see as you go through our wines, is the acidity is refreshing, but it's not aggressive. It's very much in what we're trying to achieve. The other thing with this wine, it's great by itself as an aperitif, and you can imagine on a warm summer's night, it's lovely. But we've found also that it works really well with talking to restaurateurs and things, and it goes very well with desserts, particularly fruit-based desserts. Rather than having a rich dessert wine, you have a glass of Canterbury Rose with your dessert, and it's quite refreshing and works very well. And it has enough flavour and body to it to match some really interesting desserts.
No, I completely agree. It's one of the first things I picked up on when I was examining it with my mouth, and I thought it'd be great with a rhubarb crumble. I think it would pair because it's got enough acidity to cut through the very strong flavours within that dish, but the balance of the red fruits and the rhubarb, it would be wonderful. I completely agree. Yeah, it's a very, very nice, well-balanced wine. I really enjoy that when it's been maintained, because, as we've said, it can be difficult in our cooler climate to balance the acidity, to not have things too punchy. But they're really, really lovely. It's a lovely wine to drink. Absolutely. I'm just going to have another one.
One of the things we have here, again, the level of thought that's gone in. Both our vineyards are within 10 minutes of the winery, 5 or 10 minutes by track, so we can get the fruit here very quickly and look after it. We pick different sections of the vineyard, different clones, depending on what product, what wine they're going for, different times. So we can do a lot of small batch making. And, we are one of only 2 wineries, we believe, here in the UK have what's called the Unitas system. So we have, membrane presses, which are very gentle presses, which involve inflating a bag in a metal cylinder against screens. And it gives the winemaker a huge amount of control in terms of how gently pressing the grapes, so you don't get harsh flavours coming through. But the other thing is, as I mentioned, the Unitas system is where we, above each press, you have a large bag which we fill with nitrogen, and then you fill the press with nitrogen before the grapes go in, and that stops them from oxidising, keeps the oxygen off it, and keeps them fresh. So for particularly something like the Canterbury Rose, where you want to capture that fresh fruit, we use that system. But as we talk about the other wines, it gives the winemaker options, so we don't have to use it every time. We don't use it every time, because if using it and not using it gives us slightly different flavour profiles, and it's a way of building complexity. But it's just another example of a lot of thought goes into growing in a vineyard, finding the right sites to start with, growing the right varieties, growing the right clones, and then looking after them once they're here and capturing that fruit. So I don't know if you want to go on to the second sparkling wine, Guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next, the Chalklands. which is our main sparkling wine. It's sort of the one we make the most of, and it's what most people are introduced to Simpsons by in terms of sparkling wine. And it's a classic cuvée. So generally, in England, as you know, a classic cuvée usually means it's produced from the 3 classic varieties. And in our case, the 2018 Chalklands is 40% Pinot Noir and 30% each of Chardonnay and Pinot Meunier. This is our third release of the Chalklands, first one being from 2016. And again, like the Canterbury Rose, we've looked at style as we've gone along. So the 3 releases we've had so far have been different in style slightly. So the 2016 we released, one of our first sparkling wines, was very much in the fresh, citrusy green apple style, and that won a gold medal at the Champagne and Sparkling Wine World Championships, and a trophy as best newcomer. So we're very excited about that, given it was one of our first sparkling wines to be released. The 2017 was a richer style and had some really interesting developed flavours to it. And quite a few sommeliers likened it to vintage champagne, that sort of vintage champagne character. Now with the 2018, and I have to say the first 2 releases, because we didn't get enough Pinot Meunier in 16 and 17, it was purely Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So the 2018 is the first time we had enough Pinot Meunier to put it into the blend, and that adds another dimension. And for me, the Chalklands, the 2018, for all of us, we're saying this is the style that we want to go forward with.
Right.
You've got, just starting to look at it, you've got this lovely golden, greeny golden colour to it. Again, that small bead, small bubbles, and on the nose, you just get this lovely mixture of, again, they're talking about that citrus and baked green apple, and a hint of the brioche in the background. So it's one of the, just going on the aromas, it's a wine that is attractive, but does have some promise of complexity there for those people that are into their English sparkling wines. And then on the palate, there's that green apple, baked green apple, citrus fruit, lovely and caressing in the mouth, and then the brioche comes in the background. Not strong, it just adds another dimension. And I suppose the essence of it is that lovely, refreshing English characteristic, but not with aggressive acidity, and enough fruit to make it a little bit more generous and more balanced. And we've found that this style has really broad appeal. For somebody that's at a celebration or something, and you're having an aperitif and you just want to have a bit of fun, it's really enjoyable. If somebody's a bit more serious into their wine, there's the depth and complexity there to make it really interesting at the same time. And it also has enough weight to go nicely, certainly with sort of nibbles to start, the evening off. There's enough weight there. So this, what do you think, Guy? How do you know?
Yeah, I think it's a very easy drinking sparkling wine, which is great because, as we mentioned, it's wonderful to have wines that you want to drink, and this is definitely a reach for the glass. Very smooth. There's quite a bit of the bubbles were they weren't too punchy. There was enough. They made my tongue feel alive, which is a nice sensation. A good mouthfeel, nice texture. I really like the citrus. Again, it wasn't too out of kink. As I said, it was the mouthfeel I think that I found most pleasing because it was delicate, it was smooth, and ultimately, as we said, it's a reach for the glass wine, and I like wines like that. It's very important.
Yeah.
Interesting finish as well. It's definitely got a nice pleasing finish, not too short, but enough there to, again, make me want to reach for the glass.